My name is Isadora. I'm 74, and my son and his wife moved me to the sunroom to make way for her parents, planning to ship me off to a nursing home. They didn't know the house was still in my name, and I quietly sold it right from under them. It's a long story, but I feel like someone out there needs to hear it. Before I begin, I'd love to know where you're all listening from. Drop a comment and let me know what country you're in and what time it is there. It makes me feel a little less alone knowing we're all connected. The morning the silence ended, I was in my kitchen, steeping chamomile tea in my favorite mug. It was a bright, cobalt blue ceramic, a gift from my late husband Carlos, from a trip we took to Santa Fe 20 years ago. The rain was tracing little rivers down the window pane, and the old house was creaking in that familiar way it always did. Carlos used to say it was the house's old bones waking up for the day. For the 5 years since he'd been gone, I had learned to love that silence. It was a comfortable quiet, a reliable peace that held the memory of him without the ache of his absence. Then came the crunch of tires on wet gravel. I peered through the kitchen window, my hand tightening on the warm mug. A deep navy SUV, one I recognized instantly, was pulling into my driveway, its wipers flapping like panicked arms. It was my son, Emiliano's car. I hadn't been expecting them. My heart gave a little flutter of surprise and pleasure. But then the back doors opened. My grandchildren, Mateo and Elvira, emerged, their hoods pulled up against the drizzle, backpacks slung low. Then came my daughter-in-law, Valeria, stepping out in a crisp white raincoat, not a single drop of rain daring to touch her. Emiliano was last, his arms full of coats, a nervous smile already plastered on his face. 6 suitcases. I counted them as they were unloaded from the trunk. 6. For a weekend visit? I opened the front door just as Emiliano was corralling the kids up the walkway. "Mom!" he said, leaning in for a kiss that landed on the air beside my cheek. "Surprise!" "It certainly is," I said, my eyes fixed on the mountain of luggage. "What's all this, Emmy?" "Oh, well," he started, glancing back at Valeria for support. She stepped forward, her smile as bright and hard as a diamond. "We've had a bit of a disaster at the house in Merida, Isadora. A pipe burst under the new hardwood. The whole ground floor is flooded. It's going to take a few weeks to dry out and get it all replaced. We were hoping we could stay here, just for a little while." "Of course," I said, because what else could a mother say? Come in out of the rain." They filled my quiet entryway with noise and damp coats and the scent of the city. Mateo, who was 12, immediately asked for the Wi-Fi password. Elvira, who was 16, gave me a quick, warm hug when her mother wasn't looking and whispered, "Hi, Grandma." Her hug was the only thing that felt completely genuine in that first chaotic minute. "We'll try not to be any trouble," Emiliano said, still looking anywhere but at me. I noticed the faint, dark circles under his eyes. This wasn't just about a burst pipe. I could feel it. That first evening was a blur of activity. Valeria directed traffic, sending Emiliano and the kids upstairs to claim rooms. "The master bedroom has the best light, Emmy. We'll take that one. The kids can have their old rooms." My room? They were taking my room. The room I had shared with Carlos for over 30 years. The room where his scent still lingered on the old armchair in the corner. I stood in the hallway, the now cold cup of tea still in my hand, feeling like a stranger in my own home. Later, I overheard Valeria on the phone speaking in a hushed, urgent tone. "No, it went fine. Yes, he was a bit nervous, but we're in. The first step is done." The first step of what? That night, I slept in the guest room at the end of the hall. The bed was less comfortable, the air colder. I could hear their movements through the walls, the sound of Valeria's hairdryer, the low murmur of the television from my old bedroom. I thought about what Carlos would have said. He never trusted Valeria. He told me once, years ago, "She looks at you, mi amor, but she's measuring the walls. She sees our life as a property listing." I had dismissed it then as him being overprotective. But as I lay there, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of my house being occupied, his words echoed in my mind. The silence was gone, and I had a terrible feeling that it had been replaced by a storm that was only just beginning to gather. I remembered the promise I'd made to him, a quiet vow at his funeral. I'll protect our home, Carlos, our fortress. At the time, I thought I was protecting it from developers or the decay of time. I never imagined I'd have to protect it from our own son. The next few days were a lesson in quiet surrender. Valeria moved through my house with the efficiency of a corporate executive executing a hostile takeover. She started in the living room. My hand-knitted flan, the one I'd spent a whole winter making, was folded and tucked away in a chest. In its place, she draped a stark gray cashmere throw over the sofa. She said, "It just modernizes the space, don't you think?" Not as a question, but as a declaration. My collection of ceramic birds, each one a memory from a trip with Carlos, was gathered from the mantelpiece. I found them later, wrapped in newspaper at the bottom of a cardboard box in the garage. Valeria had replaced them with a single spiky succulent in a concrete pot. She called it minimalist. I called it cold. The small confrontations were the worst. They were never loud, never overt, just tiny battles I lost before I even knew I was fighting. I came downstairs one morning to find my wedding photograph, the large framed portrait of me and Carlos, gone from its place of honor on the main wall. I found it turned to face the wall on a side table, behind a large vase Valeria had brought with her. My breath caught. I walked over, my heart thumping a slow, painful rhythm. I picked it up, my fingers tracing the outline of Carlos's smiling face. "Oh, there you are," Valeria said, walking into the room, a smoothie in her hand. "I was just trying to create a new focal point. That wall is perfect for a large, abstract piece I've been thinking of buying." I stood there, holding the picture of my 40-year marriage in my hands. I said, "This picture stays." My voice quieter than I intended, but firm. "Its place is on that wall." For a second, her mask slipped. A flash of pure annoyance crossed her features before being replaced by that saccharine smile. "Of course, Isadora, whatever you want." She said the words, but her tone made it clear she thought my wishes were sentimental and foolish. I put the picture back, but I knew it was only a temporary victory. She wasn't giving up, she was just regrouping. It was the little things, the constant, silent erosion of my life. The way she'd reorganized my kitchen cupboards, tutting under her breath. "You know, Mom, all these mismatched mugs are a bit chaotic. A matching set would be so much more calming." She was talking about my collection, my blue Santa Fe mug, the one from a roadside diner on Route 66, the one Elvira had made for me in a pottery class. Each one held a story. To her, they were just clutter. Emiliano was a ghost in the background of this invasion. He saw what was happening. Of course he did. I'd catch him looking at me with a flicker of guilt before Valeria would call his name and he'd scurry to do her bidding. He was a willing accomplice, trading his mother's comfort for his wife's approval. The salary he earned from his marketing job was good, but it was Valeria who managed their finances. Valeria who pushed for better, bigger, more. She was the engine, and he was just a passenger in their life together. My only moments of peace were with Elvira. She'd seek me out when her mother was busy. We'd sit in the garden, and she'd tell me about school, about the boy she liked, about her dream of studying marine biology. She saw the changes in the house. I knew she did. "Mom's in one of her project moods," she said one afternoon, rolling her eyes as we watched Valeria directing Emiliano to move a heavy armchair. "She gets like this." "I've noticed," I said dryly. I started keeping a small notebook hidden under the mattress in the guest room. At night, I would write down every change, every condescending comment, every item of mine that was packed away. Tuesday. Ceramic birds boxed. Wedding photo moved. Valeria called my spice rack a health hazard.
It felt foolish, but it was the only way I could hold on to my sanity. It was proof that I wasn't imagining it. My existence in my own home was being systematically erased. The worst part was the loneliness. My friends would call and I'd have to make excuses for why I couldn't meet for our weekly coffee. The family is visiting, I'd say, trying to sound cheerful. How could I explain that I was a prisoner in my own house? That I was being treated like a piece of outdated furniture? One evening, I found Valeria in the linen closet, holding my wedding dress, which was preserved in a large box. She was looking at it with a detached curiosity, as if it were a museum artifact. "The fabric is beautiful," she commented without turning around. "Lace is coming back in fashion, you know. It's a shame it's just sitting in here." My voice was ice. "Put it back, Valeria." She turned, surprised by my tone. "I was just looking." I said, "Put it back." Some things are not projects. They are not for you to assess or improve. They are memories. Leave them alone. She placed the box back on the shelf, her movements stiff with resentment. She walked past me without a word. That night, I knew something had to give. This wasn't just about furniture or mugs. This was a battle for my life, for my past, for the very space I occupied in the world, and I was tired of surrendering. The tipping point came on a Tuesday, almost 3 weeks after they arrived. I was in the kitchen, making my morning coffee, when Valeria came in, already dressed in yoga attire that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. "Isadora," she said, her tone bright and businesslike, "Emiliano and I have been talking, and we have a wonderful idea." I didn't like the sound of that. Her wonderful ideas usually involve me losing something I cherished. "We've been worried about you with the stairs," she continued, gesturing vaguely upwards. "This is a big house. We think it would be much safer and more practical for you to move downstairs, permanently." I just stared at her. "The sunroom," she announced as if she just solved world hunger. "It has a lovely view of the garden, and it's right next to the downstairs bathroom. No more stairs to worry about in the middle of the night." Emiliano shuffled in behind her, looking like a schoolboy about to be reprimanded. "It's just safer, Mom," he mumbled, refusing to meet my eyes. "We worry." The sunroom. The beautiful glass-walled room Carlos and I had built for our plants and for reading on lazy Sunday afternoons. It was also the coldest room in the house, with a stone floor and a constant drafty chill that seeped in from the old window frames. It was a room for plants, not people. "I have climbed those stairs for 35 years, I said, my voice dangerously low. "My bedroom is upstairs." "And that's exactly why it's time for a change," Valeria chirped, pulling out her phone and already tapping away at the screen. "Don't be difficult, Isadora. It's more practical for everyone. We can move your things down this afternoon." There was no discussion. It was a verdict. By lunchtime, my life had been relocated. My bed from the guest room was dismantled and reassembled in the cold sunroom. They brought down my nightstand and my lamp. My clothes were now in a portable wardrobe rack they'd bought online. It looked temporary, transient, like the belongings of a refugee. I stood in the doorway of what was now my new bedroom, watching them, and I felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the stone floor. I was being exiled, pushed out to the margins of my own home, all under the guise of safety and care. That night was the longest of my life. The house creaked differently from down there. I could hear every sound from the living room, every footstep on the floorboards above me. I could hear Valeria and Emiliano laughing at something on TV in what used to be my bedroom. I felt utterly and completely alone. Around midnight, when the house was finally quiet, I saw a sliver of light under my door. It creaked open, and Elvira slipped in, her face pale in the moonlight filtering through the glass walls. "Grandma?" she whispered. She was holding her phone, her knuckles white. "What is it, sweetheart? You should be in bed." Tears were streaming down her face. I can't, she choked out. I can't let them do it. Do what? I asked, my blood running cold. She came and sat on the edge of my bed, shivering. It's not just this, Grandma. It's not just about the room. She took a shaky breath. I heard Mom on the phone with my other grandmother. They're planning to move them in here. The air left my lungs. Valeria's parents? She nodded, tears dripping on her pajamas. They've already sold their house in Puebla. They're packing right now. Mom and Dad told them the house was theirs. A roaring sound filled my ears. It was all a lie. The burst pipe, the couple of leaks. It was a coordinated, deliberate plan. But where would I go? The question came out as a whisper. This is when Elvira broke down completely. She swiped her phone open and pushed it into my hands. It was an email, one she must have snuck a photo of from her mother's laptop. My eyes scanned the text. It was from Valeria to a facility called Villa Serenidad. The words jumped out at me. Arrangements for Isadora Granger, finalizing a move-in date for next month. Her memory is beginning to fade, gets confused easily, requires a more structured environment for her own safety.
They weren't just taking my house, they were taking my life. They were going to have me declared mentally incompetent, a confused old woman, and lock me away in a nursing home so her parents could move into the home my husband and I had built. I looked at the email, at the cold, clinical words that sealed my fate, and in that moment, in the cold, drafty sunroom where I had been exiled, something inside me didn't break. It hardened. The grief and the shock solidified into a single, diamond-hard point of clarity. I looked up at my granddaughter, whose tears were for me, whose loyalty was my only lifeline. "Thank you for telling me, Elvira," I said, my voice clear and steady. "Thank you for being brave." I handed the phone back to her. "Now go to bed, and don't you worry. Grandma is not confused, and Grandma is not going anywhere." She looked at me, a flicker of hope in her tear-filled eyes. I gave her a small, determined smile. The battle had been declared, and they had made one fatal mistake. They had mistaken my silence for weakness. The next morning, I moved with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. I waited until Valeria had taken Matteo to a soccer camp and Emiliano had locked himself in the study for a series of work calls. Elvira gave me a knowing look and announced she was going to the library to study, giving me the house to myself for a few precious hours. I didn't go to a lawyer first. I went to the back of the deep coat closet in the hallway. Behind the winter coats and a box of old holiday decorations was a small, fireproof lockbox. I knelt, my old knees protesting, and dialed the combination Carlos and I had set decades ago, our wedding anniversary. The lock clicked open. Inside was a collection of important documents, our birth certificates, our marriage license, card titles, and the thick sheaf of papers for the house. I wasn't just looking for the deed, I was looking for a memory, and I found it. My mind flew back 5 years to a sunny afternoon just like this one, about a year after Carlos had passed. Emiliano had come over alone. He'd seemed unusually formal. After some awkward small talk, he'd placed a thin folder on the coffee table. "Mom," he said, "I'd talked to a financial advisor. He said it would be much simpler for the inheritance process if you sign the house over to me now. It avoids probate, saves on taxes. It's just a smart thing to do." I remembered feeling a prickle of unease. Carlos and I had worked with a lawyer to set up our will and trust precisely to avoid these issues. Everything was supposed to pass to me, and then to Emiliano upon my death. It was clean, simple. "Let me see the papers, Emiliano," I'd said. I'd read them carefully, right there in front of him. I wasn't a lawyer, but I knew how to read. Tucked into the legal jargon was a clause that gave him the power to borrow against the property, to make decisions about it without my further consent. He would be the owner, I would be a resident. I looked up at my son. This isn't just for the inheritance, is it? This makes the house yours. Now. He had the grace to look ashamed. It's just a formality, Mom. Of course you'd live here forever. It's for your own good, to make things easier down the line. I remembered the promise I'd made to Carlos. Our fortress. I slid the papers back across the table. No, I said, my voice gentle but absolute. I understand you mean well, Emiliano, but your father and I built this house. It's my home. When I'm gone, it will be yours. But that day is not today. He had tried to argue. He had brought up taxes, logistics, Valeria's concerns about the future. Valeria is worried? I had asked. She just wants to make sure everything is settled, that you're secure, he had said, but his eyes darted away. I knew then it was Valeria's idea. My answer is no, Emiliano, I said, ending the conversation. I trust our lawyer and I trust the will my father and I wrote together. Let's not speak of this again. He had left that day angry and resentful. I had felt a pang of sadness, but also a sense of rightness. I had honored my promise to Carlos. After that, he never brought it up again. I had assumed, foolishly, that he had accepted it. Now I realized he hadn't accepted it. He and Valeria had simply started working on a different strategy, a long, cruel con to get what they wanted. Sitting there on the floor of my coat closet, I held the original deed in my hand. My name, Isadora Granger, was printed clearly as the sole owner. A wave of profound relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me dizzy. It wasn't luck. It was wisdom, my own past self, my own caution, and my loyalty to my husband's memory had given me the weapon I needed today. They had built their entire monstrous plan, the fake flood, the exile to the sunroom, the nursing home, the lies to her parents, on one sandy, unstable foundation, the assumption that they owned my house, or that they could easily take it. I placed the deed and the other essential documents into my handbag. I stood up, my knees still aching, but my spine felt like steel. I was not a confused old woman whose memory was fading. I was the owner of this house, and it was time to remind my son, his wife, and the entire world of that fact. My next stop was not going to be a quiet retreat into defeat. It was going to be the office of an old friend, a man who knew a thing or two about fighting back. Renato Morales had been our friend for 40 years and our lawyer for 30. He had helped Carlos and I draft our first wills when Emiliano was just a boy, and he'd held my hand at Carlos's funeral. He'd officially retired last spring, but I knew he still kept a small office above his garage, mostly to give him a place to escape his wife's gardening projects. I called him from a payphone at a gas station. I didn't dare use the phone in my own house. Renato, it's Isadora. I need to see you. It's urgent. He must have heard the steel in my voice because he just said, "Come on over. The door's open." His office was exactly as I remembered it, smelling of old books, pipe tobacco, and strong coffee. Framed photos of his grandchildren were jostling for space with dusty legal volumes. He was grayer now, a little softer around the middle, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. "Isadora," he said, rising to give me a hug. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "It worse. I've seen the future they have planned for me, and I don't like it."
That little... He started, then caught himself. He took a deep breath. "He's your son, Isadora. My godson." "I know who he is," I said, my voice flat. "That's what makes it so much worse." I placed the deed on his desk. "This is what I need you to confirm, Renato. Am I right? Is it still mine?" He spent a long time looking over the document, his brow furrowed in concentration. The only sound in the room was the ticking of a novelty owl clock on the wall. Finally, he looked up and a slow smile spread across his face. It's yours, Isadora. 100%. It's ironclad. He leaned back in his chair. I remember when Emmy called me, all those years ago. He asked about the legalities of you gifting him the house, about the tax implications. I told him it would be complicated and costly unless he inherited it. It seems he decided to take my advice and just wait. Or so I thought. He didn't wait, I said. He got impatient. The relief was so profound I felt my composure crack for a moment. My eyes welled up, but I blinked the tears back furiously. This was not the time for crying. This was the time for action. So, I said, my voice regaining its strength. What can I do? Renato looked at me, his expression turning serious. He was my friend, but he was also a lawyer. He had to play devil's advocate. Okay, legally, he said, leaning forward, you can do anything you want. You can sell it, you can rent it, you can kick them out on the street tomorrow with a formal eviction notice. That's the legal answer. He paused, holding my gaze. But as your friend, Isadora, this is your family. This is your son and your grandchildren. Once you pull this trigger, there's no going back. This will destroy your family forever. It will get ugly. Are you absolutely sure this is the path you want to take? I didn't hesitate. I thought of the cold stone floor of the sunroom. I thought of the words, "memory is fading" in that email. I thought of Valeria's smug smile and Emiliano's cowardly silence. I looked my old friend right in the eye. Renato, my family was destroyed the moment my son decided his mother was an inconvenience to be discarded. My family was destroyed when his wife conspired to steal my home and my dignity. I am not destroying anything. I am performing a demolition. I'm clearing away the wreckage so I can have a chance to build something new for myself. I saw a shift in his eyes. The cautious friend disappeared, and the shrewd lawyer returned. A glint of the old courtroom fighter I remembered was back. All right, then, he said, a grim smile on his face. Demolition it is. They want to play dirty? We'll play smart. First thing we need is a realtor. Not just any realtor. We need a shark, someone discreet, tough, and who hates bullies. I know just the person. He picked up the phone, and as I listened to him make the call, I felt the last 5 years of quiet grief and the last 3 weeks of humiliation begin to recede, replaced by a cold, clean sense of purpose. They had left me with nothing, they thought, but they had forgotten about the one thing I still had, power, and I was about to use it. Renato's shark was a woman named Amalia Alcozer. She was a petite woman in her late 60s with a mane of salt and pepper curls, eyes that missed nothing, and a handshake that could crush walnuts. We met at a quiet bakery 3 towns over, a place where no one would know my face. Renato tells me you have a pest problem, she said by way of greeting, foregoing any small talk. She gestured to the chair. Tell me everything. I did. I told her about the takeover, the sunroom, Villa Serenidad, and the deed. I told her I wanted to sell, and I wanted to do it quickly and silently. And you want top dollar, she finished for me. No, I said, and she looked surprised. I want the right buyer. I want someone who will love this house, not just flip it. Someone who understands that a home is more than just walls and a roof. Amalia studied me for a long moment, then gave a curt nod. I respect it. It makes my job harder, but I respect it. Bullies and developers I can handle. Finding a poet is tougher. She tapped her pen on her notepad. Okay, we move fast, we move quietly. I'll schedule inspections and appraisals only when you give me the green light. We'll need a window when the pests are out of the house. That window was harder to find than I thought. Valeria worked from home half the time, and Emiliano's schedule was unpredictable. It was Elvira who became my inside agent. She'd text me from her room, "Mom's going to yoga at 10," or "Dad has a lunch meeting downtown." She was my eyes and ears, a silent co-conspirator in the mission to save myself. Our first attempt was a disaster. Amalia called with a potential buyer who was eager to see the property immediately. He was a developer, exactly the kind of person I didn't want. Just meet him, Isadora, Amalia urged on the phone. He's an all-cash buyer. Quick close. It gets the job done. Reluctantly, I agreed. The man arrived in a flashy car, wearing a suit that was too tight and reeking of expensive cologne. He didn't look at the rose bushes Carlos had planted or the beautiful oak tree in the backyard. He walked around the property, pointing and talking about its potential for subdivision. We can knock down the main structure, put up 3, maybe 4 townhouses here, he said, rubbing his hands together. The land is where the real value is. The house is a teardown. A teardown? The home where I raised my son, the walls that held 40 years of my laughter and tears, was a teardown. I felt sick. The meeting is over, I said, my voice shaking with a rage I hadn't felt before. This house is not for you. Please leave. He looked at me like I was crazy, but I stood my ground. Amalia, to her credit, escorted him out, apologizing to me later. You were right. My mistake. No more developers. We'll find our poet. The failed attempt left me shaken. Doubt began to creep in. What if I couldn't find the right person? What if Valeria found out what I was doing? The near miss came a week later. Amalia had found another potential buyer, and we'd scheduled a secret inspection of the house's foundation and roof. Elvira had given us the all clear. Mom and Dad are going into the city. They'll be gone all afternoon. The inspector, a quiet man named George, arrived through the back gate and got to work. I was a bundle of nerves, watching from the kitchen window, my heart hammering against my ribs. He was on the roof when I saw it. Emiliano's navy SUV turning onto our street, a full 2 hours earlier than expected. Panic seized me. I grabbed my phone to call Amalia, but my hands were trembling too much to dial. The inspector was on the roof, his ladder propped against the side of the house, in plain sight.
Before I could even scream, I saw a flash of movement from the side yard. It was Elvira. She hadn't gone to the library after all. She'd been watching, standing guard. She saw the car, too. Without a second of hesitation, she sprinted to the outdoor water spigot, yanked it on full blast, and pointed the gushing hose directly into the open window of her own bedroom on the ground floor. Then she started screaming. "Oh my God, the pipe! Something burst! Mom! Dad, help!" Emiliano's car screeched to a halt. He and Valeria jumped out and ran towards the sound of Elvira's frantic yells, completely distracted by the chaos of water pouring from the window. In that precious moment of confusion, George, the inspector, scrambled down the ladder, grabbed his equipment, and slipped out the back gate as if he'd never been there. I leaned against the kitchen counter, my legs feeling like jelly. My 16-year-old granddaughter had just saved my entire plan with quick thinking and a bravery that shamed her parents. She had flooded her own room to protect me. Later, after the drama had subsided and Valeria was busy blaming the ancient plumbing of my house, Elvira found me in the garden. "Are you okay, Grandma?" she asked, her own face smudged with dirt. I pulled her into a hug, holding on tight. "I'm more than okay," I whispered into her hair. "I have you." In that moment, I knew I couldn't fail. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for the brave young woman who stood beside me. 2 days after the near disaster with the inspection, Amalia called. Her voice was different, calm, confident. "I found him, Isadora," she said. "I think I found your poet." His name was Elias Corso. Amalia arranged for us to meet not at the house, but at a local botanical garden. "Let him meet the gardener before he meets the garden," she had said wisely. I saw him before he saw me. He was standing by the rose exhibit, a tall, slender man with skin tanned by the sun and kind, crinkling eyes. He had the hands of a man who worked with them, strong, capable, stained with what looked like clay and paint. He wasn't wearing a suit or fancy shoes, just a simple linen shirt and comfortable trousers.
He introduced us, and he shook my hand gently. Isadora, he said, his voice warm and deep. Amalia tells me you have a home with a soul. I like to think so, I said, feeling a strange sense of ease in his presence. We walked for nearly an hour. We didn't talk about square footage or property taxes. We talked about the climbing roses, how to prune them, how to fight off black spot. He told me he was a sculptor, recently widowed, who had sold his studio in the hills and was looking for a quiet place by the sea to work and heal. He spoke of his late wife, Alma, with a profound love and a gentle sadness that resonated with my own feelings for Carlos. He talked about how she had wanted a garden filled with birds. He asked me about my house, not about its size or its age, but about its story. I found myself telling him about bringing Emiliano home from the hospital, about the Christmases around the fireplace, about the spot in the garden where Carlos and I had sat every evening to watch the sunset. A house that has seen a life fully lived, he said, nodding slowly. Those are the best kind. They have a strength the new ones lack. Finally, I took a deep breath. There's a condition to the sale, Mr. Corso. Please, call me Elias. Elias, I would need the right to have a small guest house, a casita, built on the back of the property, and the right to live in it for as long as I choose. It was a highly unusual request, a potential deal breaker. I watched his face for any sign of hesitation or dismissal. Instead, his eyes lit up with a genuine smile. A guardian spirit who comes with the property, he said, his tone light. He became serious. Elias, I am not interested in an empty house. I am interested in a home. The idea of having its original keeper nearby, to share its stories, and maybe a cup of coffee now and then, that sounds perfect. He then talked about his own daughter, who was struggling to save for a down payment on a tiny condo, and how he wished more families had creative solutions for housing. He mentioned his college fund, which he had carefully managed for years, and how even that wasn't enough in today's market. He understood the need for security, for a place to call one's own. We had found our common ground. This man wasn't just buying a property, he was investing in a legacy. The offer came the next day. It was for the full market value, plus a written, legally binding covenant drafted by Renato, guaranteeing the construction of my casita and my permanent, rent-free residency. The contract was drawn up. The final paperwork was prepared. Amalia scheduled the signing at a title office in a town 40 miles away. The day of the signing, I told Valeria I was going to a doctor's appointment that would take all day. Elvira, my loyal lookout, confirmed that her parents had plans, and the coast was clear. I sat in that sterile office with Amalia and Elias. I signed my name on the thick stack of papers, my hand steady. There was no triumphant flourish, no grand emotion. There was only a quiet, profound sense of rightness. I had sold my home. I had sold the fortress Carlos and I had built together. But I hadn't surrendered it. I had passed it on to a worthy successor, and in the process, I had carved out a future for myself, on my own terms. Amalia handed me my copy of the signed contracts. I placed them in my handbag, the crisp edges of the paper feeling like the sharp edge of a sword. As I walked out into the afternoon sun, the world felt different, lighter. I had the keys to my own liberation, resting silently at the bottom of my purse. The trap was set. All I had to do now was wait for the uninvited guests to walk right into it. The 2 weeks between the signing and the final confrontation were the strangest of my life. I was living under the same roof as the people who had plotted my downfall, serving them tea in a house that was no longer mine to give. I moved through the days like a ghost, a secret smile playing on my lips that they mistook for senile contentment. Valeria was in her element, fully consumed by her grand plans. She had hired painters. The living room was now a color she called grayish, a non-color that sucked all the warmth from the space. She talked endlessly about her parents, Prudencia and Garciano, and their imminent arrival. "We'll need to have a proper housewarming, of course," she announced one evening at dinner. "A party to introduce Mom and Dad to the neighborhood. A real celebration." "That sounds lovely, dear," I said, spooting mashed potatoes onto my plate. "Oh, it will be a celebration, all right. Just not the one you're planning."
She even had a small, custom-made brass plaque delivered. It read, "The Grangers." She showed it to me, beaming with pride. "We'll put it up by the front door for the party, to make it official." Emiliano, my son, seemed to be shrinking with each passing day. He was quiet, subdued, and I could see the toll the deception was taking on him. He had lost weight. He spent hours locked in the study, not working, I suspected, but hiding. He had made his choice, siding with his ambitious wife over his own mother, and now he had to live with the hollowed-out feeling of that betrayal. I felt a pang of pity for him, but it was like feeling sorry for the man who helps burn down his own village. Pity was a luxury I could no longer afford. My preparations were quiet. I went to my bank and emptied my safe deposit box. Inside was a few pieces of jewelry Carlos had given me and a small stack of savings bonds I'd forgotten about, my rainy day fund. This was more than a rainy day. This was a hurricane. I met with Elias and Amalia one last time. We finalized the plan for the party. Amalia had a certified copy of the signed and recorded deed. Elias had a quiet dignity that was more powerful than any army. They would be my backup, my silent partners in the final act. The day of the party, the house was buzzing with frantic energy. Caterers were setting up buffets in the dining room. A florist delivered an obscene number of white lilies. Valeria was a blur of motion, directing everyone, her voice sharp and commanding. While she was screaming at a caterer about the placement of canapes, I slipped out to my car. I drove to my favorite dress shop, a small boutique I hadn't visited in years. I bought a simple but elegant navy blue dress, the color of the evening sky. Carlos had always said that color made me look regal. I also bought a new pair of comfortable, low-heeled shoes. I needed to be steady on my feet tonight. When I returned, the party was about to begin. I went to the sunroom to get ready. I didn't look in the mirror and see a 74-year-old woman who was about to be discarded. I saw a soldier preparing for battle. I put on the new dress. I clipped on a pair of simple pearl earrings, the ones that Carlos had given me for our 25th anniversary. I took a deep breath. Elvira knocked softly and came in. She looked at me, her eyes wide. "Grandma, you look beautiful." "Thank you, my love. Do I look like a woman whose memory is fading?" She shook her head, a small smile touching her lips. "No, you look like you own the place." "Funny you should say that," I said with a wink. I could hear the guests arriving, the murmur of conversation and laughter growing. I could hear Valeria's high-pitched laugh, the sound of champagne corks popping. She was at the peak of her triumph, the queen of her newly conquered castle. The stage was set, the audience was assembled. It was time for the curtain to rise. I walked out of the sunroom, my head held high, and moved toward the sound of the party. I was no longer a ghost in my own home. I was the playwright of this little drama, and I was about to deliver the surprise ending. I entered the living room from the hallway. For a moment, no one noticed me. The room was crowded, filled with people I didn't know, Valeria's friends, colleagues of Emiliano, a few curious neighbors. Valeria was the center of it all, a glass of champagne in her hand, holding court near the fireplace. Her parents, Prudencia and Garciano, stood beside her, looking bewildered and proud. Prudencia was already telling someone how they'd just sold their place in Puebla to move closer to their daughter. Then Emiliano saw me. His face went pale, a deer caught in the headlights. He started to move towards me to intercept me, but it was too late. I had already stepped into the center of the room. Just then, as if on cue, the front door opened again. Amalia and Elias stepped inside. They were dressed professionally, their expressions calm and neutral. They nodded at me from across the room. My reinforcements had arrived. The chatter in the room began to die down as people sensed a shift in the atmosphere. Valeria turned and her smile faltered when she saw me, then faltered even more when she saw Amalia and Elias. "Mom, what are you doing? I thought you were resting." Her eyes darted around the room, sensing a loss of control. "I'm feeling much better, thank you, Valeria. I wouldn't miss this celebration for the world. In fact, I'm here to help you with an announcement." I walked over to the front door where the little brass "The Grangers" plaque was hanging. I touched it lightly with my fingers. "I just wanted to clear up a little misunderstanding before the evening goes any further," I said, turning back to face the room. "This plaque, lovely as it is, has the wrong name on it." A confused murmur went through the crowd. Valeria's face hardened. "Mom, what are you talking about? Don't be ridiculous." "I'm not being ridiculous, dear. I'm being precise." I gestured toward the man standing quietly by the door. "This is Mr. Elias Corso." Elias stepped forward. He didn't look at Valeria or Emiliano. He looked at a man standing near him who I recognized was my next-door neighbor, Mr. Henderson. "A pleasure to meet you," Elias said, extending his hand. "I'm Elias Corso. I just bought this house. Looks like we're going to be neighbors." The silence that followed was absolute. It was so total, I could hear the fizzing of bubbles in someone's champagne glass. It was a physical thing, a heavy blanket that smothered all sound. Valeria dropped her glass. It shattered on the hardwood floor, the sound like a gunshot in the stillness. "What?" she whispered, her face a mask of disbelief. "What did you say?" "I believe the man introduced himself," Amalia said, stepping forward. She was holding a crisp manila folder. She opened it and handed a document to Valeria. "This is a certified copy of the transfer of title, recorded with the county clerk's office last Tuesday. The sale is final. Mrs. Granger sold the property to Mr. Corso." Prudencia, Valeria's mother, let out a small, strangled gasp. "But we sold a house. We were moving in next week." Valeria ignored her mother. Her eyes, filled with a furious, dawning horror, were locked on me. You can't do that. This is our house." "No, Valeria, it never was. It was always my house, and I chose to sell it." Emiliano finally found his voice. It was a pathetic, cracking sound. "Mom, why? We had a plan for your future, for your promotion to a safer lifestyle." He actually used the word promotion. "I know all about the plan you had for me, Emiliano," I said, my gaze sweeping over him, his wife, and their stunned parents. "It involved a place called Villa Serenidad. It involved spieling my home, my assets, and my dignity. My plan was simply better." "You did this to punish us," Valeria shrieked, her voice raw with fury and humiliation. Her perfect party was in ruins. Her public triumph had become a public execution. I looked at her, at the wreckage of her ambition. I felt nothing but a vast, quiet emptiness where the pain used to be. "No," I said, turning to leave. "I didn't do this to punish you." I paused at the door and looked back at my son and the woman who had so thoroughly underestimated me. I did this to save myself. I walked out the front door with Elias and Amalia, leaving them standing frozen in the middle of their own disaster. I didn't look back. The sound of the door clicking shut behind me was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. The first phone call came the next morning. I was sitting on the balcony of a small, furnished apartment by the sea that Amalia had helped me rent, a real cup of coffee warming my hands. It was Emiliano. His voice was a tight coil of wounded disbelief. "Mom, how could you? You completely blindsided us, in front of all those people." "The way you plan to blindside me with a nursing home brochure?" I replied, my voice calm. "I simply chose a more public forum for my announcement." "But what are we supposed to do? What about Valeria's parents? They have nowhere to go," he pleaded. "That sounds like a problem for your family to solve, Eliano," I said.
You made it very clear last night that I am no longer a part of it. I paused. Was there anything else? There was a moment of stunned silence on his end, then the line went dead. He had called expecting me to fix the mess he had created. He still didn't get it. I wasn't his mother anymore, not in the way he wanted. I was a sovereign nation he had tried, and failed, to invade. Valeria tried a different tactic. She showed up at my apartment that afternoon, unannounced, holding a cheap bouquet of supermarket hydrangeas. She had traded her fury for a mask of strained sincerity. "Isadora," she began, sitting primly on the edge of the sofa, "I think we need to talk. Perhaps we can undo this, for the sake of the children, for the sake of family." "The time for talking about family was 3 weeks ago, Valeria, when you moved me into a cold room and plotted to take my home," I said, not touching the flowers. "I was worried about you," she insisted, her voice rising. "You're 74. Living alone in that big house isn't safe. And living in a sterile room in Villa Serenidad while your parents sleep in my bed?" I asked. "Don't insult my intelligence. You were never worried about my safety. You were worried about my assets." Her mask finally crumbled. "You'll regret this," she hissed, her eyes cold. "You'll be old and alone." "I'd rather be old and alone with my dignity than young and entitled without it," I said, opening the door for her. "Goodbye, Valeria." She left. A week later, I received a letter from her lawyer, a long, rambling document threatening legal action for financial and emotional distress and implying I had taken advantage of my son's goodwill. Renato's response on my behalf was a single beautiful paragraph citing the relevant property laws and politely informing them that, as non-owning occupants, or guests, they had no legal claim to anything. We never heard from her lawyer again. The 30 days they were given to vacate passed. Elias told me they left the house a mess, but he hired a crew to clean it, telling me not to worry about a thing. Construction on my casita began. From my balcony, I could see the framework bowing up, a testament to my new beginning. I joined a ceramics class at the local community center. At first, my hands were stiff, unaccustomed to the feel of wet clay. But slowly, I found a rhythm. I started making small, imperfect bowls, then mugs, then a tall, graceful vase. I was creating again, building something new with my own hands. It felt like I was healing myself from the inside out. Elias was a quiet, constant presence. He'd stop by twice a week, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with fresh pastries, always with a story about his day. We'd sit on my balcony and talk for hours. He never pushed, never pried. He was simply there, a friend. Elvira came every Saturday, without fail. She was my bridge back to a piece of my heart I thought I had lost. We never talked about her parents. We talked about her future. We looked at college brochures. I helped her with her application essays. One afternoon, sitting on the beach, she looked at me. "They treated you like a piece of luggage they could just check into storage," she said, her young face serious. "I did," I agreed, watching the waves roll in. She smiled, a flash of my own determination in her eyes. "But you came back as the owner of the whole airport." I laughed, a real deep laugh that came from my soul. The air smelled of salt and cedar and something new. Life hadn't turned out the way I planned. It had turned out better. At 74, in the aftermath of the greatest betrayal of my life, I had finally chosen myself. And that choice, that one brave, terrifying choice, had saved me.